Jean-Jacques Rousseau, very famous French intellectual of the 18th century, in reflecting on the most important things he had learned, commented, "This is the first real advantage I derived from my values. They taught me to reflect and compare values." Let me say that again. "This is the first real advantage I derived from my studies. They taught me to reflect and compare values." All human beings have values. Values play an enormous role in our lives. This is the first in a series of programs I'll be doing on values and what famous thinkers in philosophy, psychology, religion, and literature have said about them. Allow me to provide a sampling of ideas from some of the great thinkers. At the outset, though, I think it's important that I define the word value, at least in the sense that I'll be using it, and in the sense in which sociologists, for example, commonly use it. A value is that which an individual considers to be important and desirable. Again, a value is that which an individual considers to be important and desirable. Again, a sampling. Khalil Gibran, famous writer, said this, "Many who know the price of everything are ignorant of its value." Baseball manager Leo DeRocha said this, "Nice guys finish last." Jesus commented, "You shall love your neighbor as yourself." And Henry David Thoreau said this, "If a man does not keep pace with his companions, perhaps it is because he hears a different drummer. Let him step to the music he hears, however measured or far away." And on the subject of values, Reverend William Sloane Coffin made this comment, "There are two ways to be powerful. One is to have power, the other is not to need it." Writer Henry James said this, "Three things in human life are important. The first is to be kind, the second is to be kind, and the third is to be kind." T.S. Eliot, famous playwright and poet, commented that half the harm that is done in this world is due to people who want to feel important. And finally, an anonymous quotation, one my guess is that you're all familiar with, "You can never be too rich or too thin." And what are some of the specific values people have besides the ones I've alluded to? Well, again, money, status, power, sex, competition, love. Some people value being popular, self-discipline, exercise, good nutrition. Some people are very concerned about their diet. Other people, not quite so concerned, don't pay nearly as much attention to it, so that some people do value good nutrition more than others. Some people value sincerity more than others, fair play, conformity. Others value individuality. Some people value high consumption of material goods, while other people value low consumption of material goods. And some people value solitude. Other people very much value relationship. Not that they're exclusive, by the way, but I think it is fair to say that some people value solitude much more than others. And the same is true of relationship. Among the important questions I'll be dealing with in this series of programs I'm initiating today are the following. What are the advantages and disadvantages of greatly valuing the following? Again, advantages and disadvantages. Money, status, sex, competition, and power. Again, what have the famous thinkers said about these values? Also, what is success? What have the great thinkers said about success? How have they defined it? Can one's life be judged a success even if one is not very happy? And a third question I'll be dealing with later on in this series is this: where do we get our values from? What determines what our values are? Let's begin by talking about money, a pretty common value. After all, virtually all people value money. Of course, some people value it more than others. Some examples. Some examples of people who didn't value money very much. Henry David Thoreau was a Harvard graduate who only worked a regular job about 2 years of his life. For much of his life, he was a handyman, besides writing, of course, but he only had 2 books published in his life and made very little money on them. Gandhi would be an example of a person who early on in life valued money a lot, but around middle age changed his attitude towards money. Gandhi, in his 20s, 30s, and even early 40s, was a very prosperous lawyer. But as you probably know, in his mid-40s, Gandhi changed his lifestyle dramatically and adopted a life of voluntary poverty. And from his mid-40s until he was assassinated at the age of 78, Gandhi lived as a poor man. Mother Teresa, of course, would be another person who would be a good example of someone who did not value money very much. And in the other column, so to speak, people who did value money very much, well, there are many of them. Among the outstanding characters in American history, in this sense, are Andrew Carnegie, who made a fortune in the steel industry, and John D. Rockefeller, who made a lot of money in the oil industry. And of course, recently we have read stories in the newspapers about CEOs who valued money so much that they were willing to break the law to accumulate large sums of money. And hence, we have heard a lot about corporate scandals in recent years, and some very prominent CEOs going to jail, some for a very long time. And I think it's fair to say that it was their great value, the great value they attached to money, that perhaps that got them in so much trouble. Erich Fromm, very famous psychoanalyst, said this about the modern man and his concept of heaven. And again, this very much relates to the issue of money. Fromm said this: modern man, if he dared to articulate his concept of heaven, would describe the biggest department store in the world, showing all kinds of stuff and gadgets, and he himself having plenty of money with which to buy these things. Which leads to the questions, and these are questions I will be addressing myself to. What might be the advantages of greatly valuing money? What might be the disadvantages? What can money buy? What can't money buy? Let's go to the advantages first. If one succeeds in accumulating a lot of money, it could mean more freedom. It could eventually result in more freedom in the sense that one doesn't have to worry about money anymore. I recall Johnny Carson, the very famous entertainer, being interviewed, and he commented that he had made so much money that unlike his early years in show business, he no longer had to worry about money, no longer had to worry about paying the rent or paying the mortgage. These were specific comments he made. Johnny Carson did say, however, that other worries had replaced his money worries. Another advantage, I think, of valuing money, again, if one succeeds in accumulating a lot of it, is it could mean one will have more independence in life. One will not have to work a job one doesn't like, or work for a boss one doesn't like. Indeed, if one accumulates enough money, one will not have to work at all. Which brings me to another possible advantage of valuing money greatly, and that is it could mean that a person will have more leisure time. Aristotle, among the great philosophers, emphasized the importance of leisure time. Aristotle believed we all need leisure time, and that the main thing we should do in our leisure time, if we want to live fulfilling lives, is to study and reflect. It is interesting that Aristotle believed that using one's leisure time meant focusing one's mind on something significant. Bertrand Russell, another of the famous philosophers, believed that very few people have acquired the ability to use their time wisely, especially their leisure time wisely. Russell believed it was a skill to be able to use one's leisure time wisely, and it was a skill one had to cultivate. And as I said, philosopher Bertrand Russell believed that most people did not use their leisure time very well. Perhaps some celebrities who have become drug addicts and have had all kinds of other problems, emotional problems very often. Perhaps I should say, perhaps they are examples of people who never learn to use their leisure time wisely. Another advantage of valuing money greatly is that it can be an incentive to work hard. That doctors, architects, master carpenters, perhaps in many cases are people who valued money a lot, and because they wanted to make a lot of money, worked very hard to become doctors, architects, what have you. And of course, another advantage of greatly valuing money is that if one does accumulate a lot of money, one will be in a position to help people. A good example of that, perhaps, is Bill and Melinda Gates. As you know, Bill and Melinda Gates have established the Gates Foundation, which is responsible for helping millions of people in the world. Again, the Gates Foundation provides millions of dollars to help many people in the world. And Andrew Carnegie, another rich man whom I alluded to before, who made a fortune, as I said, in the steel industry. Carnegie, before he died, gave away about 90% of his fortune. And in an essay he wrote entitled Wealth, Carnegie said this: "The man who dies rich dies disgraced." So one of the values of this very rich man was giving a lot of money away. In other words, using the money to help people. What might be some of the disadvantages of greatly valuing money? Well, I think it's fair to say if one greatly pursues money, it might lead to tunnel vision, in the sense that one might neglect some very important things in life, such as one's health or one's family. One might work very long hours, and perhaps work very long hours at a job one doesn't like. This could lead to much stress and even fatigue. Another possible disadvantage, again, of greatly valuing money, is that it could stifle one's self-development in many ways, that one might not develop many aspects of one's personality. For example, if one is working 12, 14, 16 hours a day, one might not have time to cultivate the intellectual in oneself by reading books and reflecting on important things. One might not be able to cultivate the music lover in oneself, the craftsman in oneself. One might not be able to develop hobbies that might provide many fulfilling hours in life. And of course, if one is so absorbed in making money, one may not take time out to help other people. Some of the great philosophers have said that a third possible disadvantage of greatly valuing money is that it could lead a person to lose one's integrity. Socrates said this, and I'm quoting him: "The more people value money, the less they value virtue." He went on to say, "We can imagine riches and virtue as always balanced in scales against each other." And Jesus, in Matthew 6, verse 24, said this: "No one can serve two masters. You cannot serve God and wealth." And Thoreau, in commenting on money and its value, said this: "The cost of a thing is the amount of your life you must exchange in order to get it." Another question I would like to raise is this: what can money buy? And in a few minutes, I'll be talking about what money can't buy. But right now, what can money buy? Well, I've already mentioned freedom, leisure, and independence. Also, perhaps money can buy less anxiety and maybe even more kindness. Bertrand Russell talked about this. Bertrand Russell said that he believed that most people in the world, especially married men with children, have a haunting fear in the back of their mind about going broke, and that they worry about what will happen to the wife and children should they go broke. And Russell said, as a consequence of people's financial worries, they often don't treat other people as kindly as they should. Indeed, sometimes they treat other people unkindly, even cruelly. Russell believed that if people had more economic security, they would be more disposed to treat other people kindly and fairly because they wouldn't have this haunting fear of what might happen to their family, again, if they went broke. Another advantage, I think, of money, and again, an example of what money can buy, an example of what money can buy is education. We know that in order to go to college, even state schools and even city universities requires money. And of course, if one wants to go to a private university in America, it can be very expensive. So the idea is that one thing, I should say among the things that money can buy, among the important things money can buy, is a good education. And of course, money can also buy traveling experiences. We know that traveling can be an education in itself. And if one has the money to travel, well, that's another advantage money will provide. Let me go now to the other question, and that is, what can't money buy? Well, I think it's fair to say that money cannot buy complete emotional security. Money cannot buy complete freedom from fear and worry. Money cannot buy complete freedom from fear and worry. Life is unpredictable and full of disappointments. Even rich people experience illness, accidents, death of loved ones. Also, of course, money can't buy good relationships. Money can't buy love. It is no easier for rich people to establish good relationships than it is for middle class and poor people. And again, I'm talking about relationships which are deeply satisfying to the heart and the soul. Money can't buy a good conscience. Money can't buy self-respect. Indeed, Carl Jung and so many therapists have talked about the number of rich clients they have had in therapy. People who had a large amount of money and even status, and yet did not feel good about themselves, suffered from low self-esteem. So the idea that money and high self-respect go hand in hand just is not true. Any therapist will tell you that. Perhaps the famous musician Eric Clapton is an example of this. In an interview on the TV program 60 Minutes many years ago, Eric Clapton said this: "I'm an egomaniac with an inferiority complex. I'm an egomaniac with an inferiority complex." Money, of course, also cannot buy immortality. Indeed, death is the great equalizer. Rich people, middle-class people, poor people, all die. And perhaps most important of all, money can't buy wisdom, meaning good sense, good judgment. Perhaps an example of this is former baseball superstar Darryl Strawberry, who made millions in baseball, but who subsequently had all kinds of problems with alcohol and other drugs. And Strawberry said this: "I know everything about hitting a baseball and nothing about living." Wisdom, of course, is all about knowing the best way to deal with anxiety, stress, everyday problems, other people, lust, envy, feelings of inadequacy and inferiority. And of course, people who have wisdom know more about how to use their time wisely than people who don't have wisdom. What I'd like to do now is to move to another pretty common value and explore it in terms of its advantages and disadvantages. And the value is status. By status, I mean a high ranking in society. Again, I think it's fair to say that some people greatly value status, and at the opposite end of the spectrum are people who have not greatly valued status, or who don't value it very much. Among the people who do value status very much, I think would be people like Donald Trump and Calvin Klein. And I think among the people historically who did not show much interest in status, was St. Francis of Assisi, who incidentally was born into a rich family, but like Gandhi, lived the life of a poor man. And of course, Jesus and Buddha did not value status. With regard to status symbols, Napoleon said this about Paris when he was alive. Napoleon said that in Paris, a man acquires wisdom not by being virtuous, but by the quality of his horse and carriage. I think it's fair to say that today, in our society, people can acquire status through the kind of home they live in, the car they drive, the kind of furniture they have, the clothes they wear, and the job title they have. Writer J.D. Salinger, in a very famous book he wrote entitled Franny and Zoe, I think provides some stimulation on this subject of status. In this book, again entitled Franny and Zoe, J.D. Salinger's main character is a young girl named Franny, who is at college. She's at an Ivy League kind of school, and she's been in the theater group, but she decides to leave the theater group. And her reasoning for leaving is concern with the idea that she's angry at herself, that she seems to be interested in impressing people and seems to be interested in status. And what I want to do now is something I rarely do, and that is to read 2 paragraphs from a book. Again, this book by J.D. Salinger entitled Franny and Zoe, because again it does shed some light on the subject I'm talking to. Franny is talking to her boyfriend and trying to explain why she's quit the theater group at the university she's attending. All I know is I'm losing my mind, Franny said. I'm just sick of ego, ego, ego. My own and everybody else's. I'm sick of everybody that wants to get somewhere, do something distinguished and all, be somebody interesting. It's disgusting. It is. I don't care what anybody says. That's why I quit the theater department. Just because I'm so horribly conditioned to accept everybody else's values. And just because I like applause and people to rave about me, it doesn't make it right. I'm ashamed of it. I'm sick of it. I'm sick of not having the courage to be an absolute nobody. I'm sick of myself and everybody else that wants to make some kind of splash. Pretty powerful stuff. Is Franny's attitude wise or foolish? Again, she says, I'm sick of not having the courage to be an absolute nobody. What have the great thinkers said about that? And again, what are the advantages and disadvantages of greatly valuing status? And first of all, why do people want status? Well, there's a very good book that came out a few years ago entitled Status Anxiety by Alain de Botton, which addresses itself to this subject of status. And again, one of the questions he raises is, why do people want social status? And among the reasons the author gives are the following. He says this, and I'm quoting him. We are afflicted with a congenital uncertainty as to our value. Again, we are afflicted with a congenital uncertainty as to our value. He goes on to say that we are anxious about the place we occupy in the world. Psychiatrist Alfred Adler also addressed himself to the reason so many people seek social status. And Adler said the most common reason is that people are attempting to compensate for their feelings of inferiority. You know that in previous programs I've talked a lot about Adlerian psychology. Adler believed the root of human psychology is the inferiority complex. He believed we all have feelings of inferiority, and that one of the ways people often try to compensate for them is to strive for social status. Among the other reasons people seek status are one-upmanship. Sometimes it involves making other people envious. Indeed, evoking envy can be a main cause of the pursuit of status. Just recently, the New York Times ran some advertisements about Mercedes-Benz automobiles. And let me tell you what the advertisements said, what the print was in the advertisements, besides showing you a picture of a Mercedes-Benz. The print part of the advertisement said this, more horsepower, bigger engine, increased envy. Many sociologists over the years have commented on what they call conspicuous consumption, the idea that people often buy expensive goods because they desire to be envied. Well, what are some of the possible advantages of greatly valuing status? Well, it's possible that it will lead to an improved image in the eyes of others if one succeeds in getting status. Also, like valuing money, it could lead to an incentive to work harder. If one wants the status of a doctor, a PhD, or a CEO, it will mean one will have to work hard. Also, it's possible that if one values status very much and pursues it and gets it, it could result in greater self-respect. Recently, by the way, some studies have been done about cell phones as status symbols. Dr. Jeffrey Miller, an evolutionary psychologist at the University of California, again has done some research on the connection between cell phones and status. And one of Dr. Miller's conclusions is this. He says, and I find this quite interesting, what cell phones display is social importance and the fact that you're plugged into a social network and are so important that you're reachable at all times. He also goes on to say that teenage girls often use cell phones to advertise the size of their social network, especially to other teenage girls. I'm running a little short on time now, so I'll have to wait until my next program to talk about some of the disadvantages of greatly valuing status, and I'll have some other comments about what great thinkers have said about social status. But finally, Henry David Thoreau reminds us that we are all artists. In Walden, Thoreau wrote, "To affect the quality of the day, that is the highest of arts."